Hello and welcome to Messages of Hope. Tonight we have Stewart Emery. He is a leader in the human potential movement and the author of Success Built to Last and Do You Matter? And I'm Jill Lublin, your host and author of 3 books, Guerrilla Publicity, Networking Magic, and Get Noticed. And I'm going to talk to you and Stewart tonight about Messages of Hope. Welcome, Stewart.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. You know, I know you said something about being at ground zero of the human potential movement, and that is so true about you. I feel like I'm interviewing a legend and so grateful for it.
Well, I don't know, being a legend is
Yes.
reminds you you've been around for a long time.
Well, but that's a good thing. And let's talk about that a little bit, about your history, if we may, for a moment, and bring the viewers up to date. I know that you were one of the, in a way, founders of EST, right? And
what happened was I was born in Australia. I clearly don't speak American quite yet, and came from poor circumstances, and went out into the world and became an advertising man. Because I thought the solution of being poor and miserable was to get money. Then I found you could get money and still be miserable. And about the time that happened, I saw a copy of Look magazine that was edited by George Leonard, who's quite a hero in this area. And it was about what was happening in California and a thing that was starting called the Human Potential Movement, which was about people transforming their lives. And I said, great, sounds like just what I need. So I got on an airplane, basically, and came to San Francisco for a couple of weeks in 1971. And basically, I'm still here. But,
you know, never left.
Never left. I stood on the corner of Haight and Ashbury in the 1971. I thought, Stewart, you're not in Sydney anymore. And then I ran into a fellow called Werner Erhard. And we got to talking, and we did a marathon workshop for his staff, and that was the weekend one of those world training programs began.
Wow, so that really, I mean, what an amazing thing. Do you remember just a quick story about what it was like back then, so to speak?
Well, in many ways we've come full circle, because a lot of people then were looking at what their parental generation represented. So it was, you know, 2 houses, that was the goal, and 2.5 kids. I always wondered about how do you get half a kid, you know, and a country club membership and the 2 martini lunch, and what was the pain of the Vietnam War and the maybe revolution is too strong a word, but the radicalism of Berkeley and just really things to be against.
So it was a time, you mean, when people were against things?
Against things. And they wanted a better way. They thought this traditional way of their parents was wrong. And then we moved fast forward, and a lot of those people who were, you know, social movers became the people we're now rebelling against, you know, saying that they're about greed and it's unfettered capitalism. And it was just interesting to watch that go full circle.
So you think now we've actually come full circle back to that time in a way?
In a way.
Yes.
It kind of feels like that for me, because the message basically was, at the end of the day, what is it that we want out of life?
You're saying that's always been the message
I
for
think
you?
that's, yes. But that was a question we were asking people back then, what do you want?
Uh-huh.
And we would argue that what people want out of life is a great experience of being alive.
Yeah, now how about that for a good answer?
Yes. So the mistake, and I was an ad man, so guilty as charged, you think, well, because I was the guy saying, in order to be happy, you've got to consume the right stuff. That would be my customer stuff. I mean, I was a guy telling you if your deodorant failed, your life would. If you didn't use my client's toothpaste, you wouldn't get kissed, let alone anything else you were hoping for later that night. I mean, you get the drift here, right?
Yes.
And that was the whole message. Consume the right stuff and you'll be happy. And it's a giant Ponzi scheme. And we periodically realize it's a giant Ponzi scheme, and we realized that in the end of the 60s and the early 70s. And I think we've just gone like a train wreck into that all over again. Because basically, you know, I remember in Australia, I woke up one morning with enough stuff to start my own world. I thought, God, I got all this stuff. That's what I thought was going to do it.
And so you weren't happy, obviously.
Well, you know, it hadn't made the difference I had expected.
Uh-huh.
And so I got out my psychology books from school and dusted them off, and philosophy books, and started reading Oriental philosophy and Asian philosophy. I guess that's what you call it now. Oriental's politically incorrect. I'm Australian. I don't do well at the political correct thing. But I started reading that and realizing that it was always about the experience.
Which experience?
Of what it feels like to be fully alive. What it feels like to have the experience of a great life. Because people fall in love with their ideas about things.
Yes.
But we really, as we used to say, we don't experience our experience. We live conceptually. But that feeling that my friend Marcy Shimoff talks about, you know, this happy for no reason, this happiness that just wells up from the inside, and you stop and pause for a moment, and you go, good heavens, I'm happy. And I have no idea why. I'm just happy.
Yes. And it's a great place to be.
Yeah, and that happiness is a practice, not something you get. It's an expression, not something that's given to you by another or by some sort of external circumstances.
Well, I know that in your life, you also went on to form Actualizations, another great human potential growth movement.
Yes.
You really are, I think you called it ground zero, right?
Yes.
You really were and are and continue to be a leader in that. And through books that many of our viewers might know, like Good to Great, and the new ones, Success Built to Last and Do You Matter, I love how you, in a way, show us messages of hope, people's stories that have worked.
Well, actually, Good to Great was Jim Collins. So
oh, excuse
yes,
me.
No, it's okay. Jim's a good
but it
friend.
sounded good.
Yes, yes, I wish, right? That's the most successful business book in the history of business books.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's a very wonderful guy.
Well, you're not doing too bad either.
No, I'm doing okay. Thank you.
So you were sharing with me a little bit of a story about an 83-year-old man who was reading your book
Well,
in an
yes,
airport.
when we did Success Built to Last, there was a trilogy. There was Built to Last, which was the first book that Jim did with Jerry Porras. And then Jim did Good to Great. And there was always said, okay, if you do Built to Last, who makes great companies? Well, people who know how to get a company and make it great. Well, what kind of people are they? Well, they're people who know how to be successful. Well, how do you learn how to be successful? And we always think you go out and talk to people who've done it. So we went out and talked to some of the most famous people in the world. We had the billionaires, you know, Buffett, Gates, Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, Sir Richard Branson. We had people like Maya Angelou. We had Quincy Jones. We had Nelson Mandela, Oprah. So we had a lot of people we talked to who'd been out there and done it.
Yes.
Amazing stories. And one, if you boil it down to the simplest thing, what they have in common is that they found out what it was that mattered to them. That's why I call Success Built to Last, Creating a Life That Mattered. They found out what their inner passions were, and they learned how to get world class at them. So I'm walking through an airport. I'm actually in Minneapolis, and I'm walking down the ramp, and I see a man with white hair. I'm kind of into like the white hair thing. So there's a man there, I think 80-something, I guess, and he's reading the book because it was floor stacked at the bookstore, and he's crying. And I thought, gee, that wasn't what I wanted, for people to read the book and be sad.
Cry.
And cry. And then you go through, well, am I going to say anything? I'm going to leave him in his privacy. And so I went over and I started talking to him. And
Did he know who you
well,
were?
no, because there's no photographs on the cover.
Oh.
And so I said, well, excuse me, but I'm this guy. And I said, what's going on? And he said, I'm reading this book, and I realized I've spent my whole life doing something that I wasn't passionate about, that I settled. And I've always felt there was something missing. There was an emptiness inside. And now I'm realizing that I never found my passion, or when I got glimpses of it, I didn't pursue it. And now it's too late. And I said, what do you mean it's too late? He said, well, I'm old. I said, well, you don't need to tell me how old. But I said, how much longer do you think you're going to live for? He said, I think at least another 10 years. I said, well, what if I told you that in 10 years you can actually get to be, even at your age, world class at something that deeply matters to you?
Oh.
And he just lit up.
Oh. Must have changed his life right there.
I think in that moment, because that's really the important message.
Well, I think that's a really key message about finding something and your passion that matters.
Yes.
And you state it as if it's easy. Here's an 83-year-old. I think many of us go, I don't know what matters. I feel good about this. I love doing that. How do we find it?
Well, a couple of things. In this book we have a chapter there called Silent Screams. And it's a chapter about, usually as children, there was that dialogue we had with ourselves along the lines of, one day I'm going to grow up and become.
Yeah. You mean besides a ballerina and a policeman?
Yes, yes. But there were these things, and then it gets shut down by our parents don't think it's practical, or our teachers don't think it's practical, or society doesn't approve. And so we kind of just shut that down. And then we kind of follow what we're told to do in a lot of ways. We may on the one hand rebel, but we kind of get controlled by and owned by what we rebel against. So we end up going down certain paths and doing what we think is the right thing to do, or the best thing to do, or the sensible thing to do, or the thing that will make the most money, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So we really betray ourselves. We betray our soul. We betray our inner passion. We betray the inner self. And so we go through life kind of settling. As I said to one day a man said to me, he said, you know what, I spent my life being adequately good at things, so I never had to deal with what I could be great at.
Wow.
And we call it in the book the trap of competency, or the curse of competency. Because if we're reasonably good at something, we'll get by. But it's a dull experience compared to being truly great at something. And it doesn't have to be something that's world-shattering. I had an amazing experience in Guangzhou, China. Now, seriously into coffee. Most things I get into, like I go deep. So I got into coffee. And I'm in Guangzhou, China, and they're not really into coffee, you know, like so. And I really...
The Chinese are into tea.
Oh, it's wonderful. You know, they were collecting tea like we collect wine. So they have teas that are 75 years old, and they're very valuable. So anyhow, the woman who's my interpreter there and who's guiding me around says, well, come and I'll get you some coffee. And she takes me to a Starbucks attached to a railway station in Guangzhou. Now you know, I actually, in Do You Matter, we predicted Starbucks' current plight for lots of reasons. And, you know, we think they're not in the coffee business. They got into the flavored milk business.
Ah.
And so I thought, I haven't had a decent coffee at Starbucks in the United States. How can it be any good in Guangzhou, China? So we go there, and they've got the beautiful Lama Zoka manual machines that they started out here with, but replaced them with super automatics. And there's a Chinese guy there with spiky hair that looks like he's escaped from a biker gang in East Oakland with jewelry and piercings. And he's like alive. So through the interpreter, we start talking, and he said, you know, he'll make me a great coffee. And I thought, well, I started with an espresso because the hardest thing in the world to pull is a great double espresso. That's the test. And if it's a really good one, you go, well, I tell you so. He makes it for me, and I go, oh, God. That's why they call it a God shot. And then he made me a cappuccino with this beautiful art on the top with a heart. This is in Guangzhou.
That he made?
Yeah, he made this, what they call latte art. Oh. So he made this heart, this pattern in the way the milk is poured into the coffee. Yeah. And I thought it was world class. And I said, where did you learn to do that? He said, YouTube. He had been watching the World Barista Championships on YouTube in China. Now it gets better. I go upstairs, it's a Starbucks, so there's free Wi-Fi, even in Guangzhou. I open up my MacBook, I log on to Skype, put on the headset, call my friend in North Carolina who runs homebarista.com, and I said, you're not going to believe this. He said, why are you? He said, aren't you in China? I said, yes, I'm at a Starbucks in China. He said, get out of here. And I told him the story about a great cup of coffee. And so they're inspirational stories for me. What lights me up is to watch people who found out what they love to do and they become great at it. I'm moved by human greatness in any form.
So, okay, so we get a spike